Hello everyone, and welcome to the Global Mapper webinar for the month of April. Currently, all attendees are in a listen-only mode, which means that you can hear the presenter, but your microphone is automatically muted. At this time, you should be able to see the introductory slide on your screen. If you need assistance or have connectivity issues during this presentation, please send an email to feedback@bluemarblegeo.com. Our support team will reply to you promptly. If you have questions during the presentation, you can use the questions tool on the GoToWebinar panel to the right of your screen. Our panelists will try and answer your questions as they are submitted, and if necessary, the presenter will address any outstanding questions at the end of the presentation. We will respond to as many as we can during the session, and will follow up via email on any remaining questions. Remember, for ongoing questions about the features and functions of Global Mapper, you can always email our support team at gmsupport@bluemarblegeo.com. Before we begin, we would like to announce some upcoming dates where you can come out and meet some of the Blue Marble staff and learn more about our products. On April 30th, we will be exhibiting at the Maine Municipal Conference in Augusta, Maine. In May, we will be exhibiting at the Geospatial World Forum in Rotterdam, Netherlands, during the week of the 13th, and at the Location Intelligence Conference in Washington, D.C. on the 21st. From May 19th to the 22nd, we will be attending the AAPG conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and assisting with the kickoff of the U.S. East Chapter of the APSG Spring Meeting. The APSG is an independent industry organization focused on highly accurate mapping for oil and gas exploration. If you are working in the Pittsburgh area, we encourage you to attend the APSG meeting. Attendance is free, so please visit www.apsg.info to sign up. If you're planning to attend any of these events, please stop by our booth and say hi. We'll be happy to show you the latest versions of our products or answer any questions you may have. Blue Marble product experts will also be providing training at several locations over the coming months. There are still places available for the following training events. Next week, on April 29th and 30th, we are offering Global Mapper training in Denver, Colorado. Global Mapper training will also be available in Oklahoma City during the week of May 20th, and we have a few spaces left for our upcoming Applied Geodesy and Geographic Calculator training class on May 6th in Houston, Texas. For more information or to register for any of these training classes, please visit the Blue Marble website and click on the training link in the support menu. During today's presentation, which will be about 60 minutes in duration, we will explore Global Mapper's powerful Digitizer tool and how it is used to create and edit vector features. We will consider the basic click-to-draw functions as well as advanced tools such as cropping, edge matching, and coordinate geometry input. A recording of today's webinar will be available online and, along with previous webinars, can be accessed from the Blue Marble webpage. At this time, I would like to introduce David McKittrick, Senior Applications Specialist at Blue Marble.
Thank you, Raina, and thank you all once again for taking time out of your busy days and busy evenings or whatever time of day it happens to be and joining us for the latest of our Global Mapper webinars. This time we're going to be talking about the Digitizer tool. It's a little bit of a different focus for us. In previous webinars we have tended to focus more on maybe some of the analytical tools or the volume of data that can be imported or working with specific data sets. Well, this month we're starting essentially with a clean slate. We're going to be working with the tools that enable you to create your own data, to build your own data sets, or to modify features as necessary. When I first started thinking about the content for this webinar, my initial thought was that, well, it's going to be a very short webinar. There's really no way we can fill up a full hour just talking about the Digitizer. It's a fairly straightforward tool after all. And when I started to go and explore some of the functions and the more advanced tools, I quickly realized that there's a lot more in Global Mapper than initially meets the eye. So today, hopefully, we're going to introduce you to some functions you may not have used. I assume for those of you who are experienced Global Mapper users, a lot of the tools we will talk about you have used before. If you're completely new to the software, we're hoping we can kind of give you a little bit of an idea as to some of the capabilities of Global Mapper. Just before we begin, I should say that a lot of what I do today is going to be very hypothetical. I'm going to be essentially doodling In the interests of clarity, the features that I create are going to be created against a fairly a standard background, a white background, so we can see what we're doing. In the real world, it's not likely you're going to approach your digitizing project this way. It's more likely you're going to be tracing some imagery or delineating some features that you can actually visually see on the screen. So it's a little bit unrealistic in that sense, but again, in the interest of clarity, we want to make sure that you can see the results of what I'm doing. I am going to be using the standard version of Global Mapper today. It's Global Mapper 14.1, which, by the way, as we've mentioned in the past, is available to you on our website. If you're using an older version, you can go ahead and download that from our website and give it a trial. Or if you're using maybe 14.0, you can upgrade for free. So that tool is available to you. I'm going to be using the standard version today. All of what I'm going to be doing today is also available in Global Energy Mapper. So if you're a Global Energy Mapper user, you're not missing out today. This is a kind of a cross-platform webinar. It will cover functionality that's available in both of those tools. So what are we going to be doing today? Let's take a quick look at our agenda, and we'll actually, before we do that, we'll take a look at the abstract, just kind of to remind ourselves why we're all here today. We are, as it says on the screen, going to be looking at the Digitizer tool. It is one of the more powerful components of the software, very often overlooked in that regard, but it is a very, very powerful tool. And we're going to be going in and starting with some of the basic tools, and then, as I said before, we're going to get into some functions that you may not have used before or you may not be aware of. So that is basically what we're planning to do for the next hour. We are going to start by answering the question, what is a digitizer? I've omitted to put my question mark at the end of this bullet. My English teacher would be very angry with me. But what is the digitizer is the first question we will answer. We're going to look at our basic drawing tools. Again, this is going to be very quick, very easy. Again, most of you, I assume, who have used the software will be familiar with the basic drawing capability. We will then get into some of more advanced drawing tools. How you can create very specific types of features like range rings or perhaps a grid or things like that. We'll talk a little bit about some of those more advanced tools. We're going to talk a little bit about configuring the digitizer, some of the configuration options to make it behave the way you want it to behave, some of the settings you can apply. As well as a data creation tool, the digitizer is also used for editing. So if you import a layer, for instance, and you need to make some modifications to that layer, the digitizer also performs that function, selecting a feature, making whatever modifications are appropriate. And we'll look at some of the editing functions. Also, we can use it for converting features. There's a number of ways that data can be converted, the most basic of which would be things like converting lines to areas or converting points to lines. So we'll look at some of those options. And then at the end, and this is time permitting, we'll take a look at some very specific tips and tricks, some recommendations for using the digitizer to its best effect. So that's our plan today. Let's go ahead and bring up the application, and we'll start to address that very first bullet that was in my slide as to what exactly the digitizer is. Within the context of Global Mapper, the digitizer is the tool that lets you work with, create, and interact with vector features. And you'll notice my cursor right on the screen here, right on the toolbar, has selected a tool that looks like a little pencil with the lines coming out the end. I've had to describe this numerous times by phone, what exactly the digitizer is. And my description is it looks like a pencil. This is the tool that you will use to create, to edit, and to manipulate those vector features. Also, along the bottom of my toolbar array, there are a number of buttons you can see which all contribute to the digitizing process. These are tools for specifically creating specific items, area features, line features, point features, etc. There are also tools for applying modification to selected features, and obviously you can see most of these are grayed out right now because I don't have anything on my screen. But if I had a feature that I'd selected, I would have the option to perform certain functions, and these buttons would be available to me. So really the digitizer, as far as the toolbar is concerned, is initially the digitizer tool and then the buttons along the bottom row. By the way, you do not have to initially select the digitizer to activate one of the other buttons. So if I want to create an area feature, I can simply click that button directly. Now, in its original form, the digitizer is in edit mode. And as you'll see on my screen, it says edit right by my cursor. It's waiting for me to select something. It's waiting for me to choose an object to which I can then apply some sort of modification. So that's the kind of the default characteristics of the tool. Obviously, to be of any value, the digitizer, we obviously need to have features on the screen. So in terms of my workflow scenario today, I'm going to begin by creating a couple of features, very basic features. And for this, I'm just going to zoom a little closer. Obviously, with nothing as by way of reference, I'm just going to simply click my first button here, which is my tool for creating areas. For those of you who are completely new to Global Mapper, you obviously can't see what I'm doing, but I'm simply going to click with my left mouse button until I get to the point where my feature has been created to my specifications, and I'm going to right-click to finish. And that's the function that a lot of people don't get initially. If I try the left click again, we'll add an additional point. Oh, I don't really need that additional point. I want to remove the point that I just added. Well, we now have a Control-Z option that will take that last point away. And let Control-Z undo. I'm just using the keyboard shortcut for that purpose. And now I can right-click to finalize the creation of my feature. So in its very basic form, the digitizer, using the left mouse button, allows you to create features, use that right mouse button to finalize the process. And obviously in this case, it's specific to an area. I'll just move this dialog box out of the way. And you can see this area feature outlined based on the clicks of my mouse, waiting for confirmation that it actually is something I want to keep. The modify feature info is key to working with vector features in Global Mapper, because it's here that we can enter things like the name for the feature, we can assign it to a particular feature type if we need, and we can place it in a specific layer or create a new layer for this feature. So this is really the final confirmation that what you've created is what you want. You click OK, you add attributes as necessary, and we'll just go with the defaults and click OK. And then we have created our first feature, our first drawing feature. And obviously not created with a lot of care and attention, but that's how we create basic features in Global Mapper. That's how we digitize features. I'm going to go through some of the additional buttons to create variations on the basic digitizing theme. The second button in my array here is a tool for creating rectangular features. And you can see as I click and hold, I'm clicking and holding with my left mouse button. Now my left mouse button is held down. I can simply draw a rectangular shape in by whatever dimensions I choose, release my mouse button, and I get the same dialog box once again. And I'll just click OK. I've created a rectangle. If I want to constrain that to a square, using the same tool, I hold my Shift button down on my keyboard. There's a lot you're not seeing here. I'm going to have to keep describing what I'm doing, but I'm holding the Shift button on my keyboard. I'm clicking, and I'm dragging with this area tool. Let me make sure it's selected once again. Oops. Let's try that one more time. And for some reason it's decided not to cooperate with me today, but the Shift button will constrain that to a square feature as opposed to a free-form rectangular feature. Now, one of the things that you'll see today as I go through and show you some of these tools is the ability we have to essentially wipe the slate clean. In the real world, this may not be as useful, but in my world, where I'm, as I said before, I'm doodling, very important for me to keep it clean. Control-U is the universal onload button. Basically, it will onload everything on my screen, and I go back to my default again. We have line tools, and again, clicking the line tool activates the line function. And same as creating an area, right-click to finish, but in this case, obviously, it's just a linear feature. So creating lines, creating areas, very straightforward. A variation on the line tool is the freeform or trace mode line tool. We're going along the buttons consecutively here. My fourth button, if I select it, now allows me to click and hold with my mouse button and essentially freeform draw. And this is great if you're drawing something of an irregular shape, you're following a trail, for instance. Perhaps you have an aerial image and you want to delineate a river course. Obviously, you can follow that with a high degree of accuracy. And again, we're confirming the visual parameters by clicking the OK button. We also have tools for creating rectangular features in a line form as opposed to an area form. So that fifth button essentially is what is the tool that lets us delineate a rectangle but not fill it in as an area feature. So those are the basic tools for creating lines, for creating areas. And again, by way of introduction, the final button I'm going to show you, we're going to jump across a little bit here. I want to show you my new point tool. Clicking the new point tool, very simple. Just click on the map, and because it's a single point, I'm obviously not creating multi-vertex feature, so I'm clicking a single point, and again clicking OK, and my point is created on the map. What I haven't shown you is obviously setting the particular parameters, maybe establishing a certain symbology, or assigning a label to this point, or maybe making the symbol completely invisible so it appears just as text. Those are all options you can assign after creating that point. So just by way of introduction, those are the very basic digitizing tools, which I'm almost certain most of you in attendance today use on a daily basis, if not at least once every while when you launch Global Mapper. So that's the easy part out of the way. Let's take a look at some of the more advanced functions now. Again, I'm going to wipe the slate clean. I'm going to go back to my clean screen, if you like. And I'm going to select the Digitizer tool itself. And the reason I'm going to do that is because not only does that allow me to choose an existing feature, but it also gives me access to a number of advanced tools. And those advanced tools are accessed by right-clicking. If I right-click on the map, I can go to either creating areas or lines or points. And each of these has a submenu. Well, we have the standard features for creating our standard areas like we did before. We also have a number of additional tools in here. I'm going to go through some of these selectively. I may not have time to cover everyone, but I'm going to go through some of these and just show you what they do. One of my favorites is this rotated rectangle tool. The rotated rectangle tool behaves in a slightly different way than the rectangle we created previously, where we basically dragged a box to create that rectangle. This tool essentially starts as a line. I'm clicking somewhere on a place on the map. I'm now clicking a second place on the map. I'm clicking again with my left mouse button. So I've essentially created a two-click line, but my mouse now drags that box to either side of my original line, creating, as the name implies, a three-click rectangle. That's an area feature that was created by initially establishing the alignment for the first side of that rectangle and the length, and then pulling it out to establish the width. So very useful tool, very interesting tool. Again, unload that data. Let's go back and we'll take another look at another tool in here. By right-clicking, we can create a rectangle of specific coordinates. We very often get this question. I've seen the Digitizer. I've seen how it works. I can create area features. I can create rectangles. What if I want those features to be of a specific, be at a specific location? I know the particular parameters. Well, you can open up this dialog box and create that rectangular feature based on a number of different variables that are displayed here. Your lat-long degrees, for instance. You type in the north and the west latitude. That would be the kind of the upper left corner, if you like. The bottom right corner would be your south and your east longitude. Or you can use the same process using your global projection. In other words, if your map is currently projected using a different system, perhaps UTM, you can establish your northing and eastings and establish the same process for creating that rectangular feature. Or you can establish the northwest corner and then the specific dimensions of that rectangle. So there are a number of ways of doing this. Again, what we're doing here is we're precisely creating a rectangular feature based on a known point of origin, which in our case is the northwest corner, and then defining either the area or the coordinates of the opposite corner. I'm not going to go forward with that right now, but that's a very, very powerful tool for that purpose. Another right-click option, and hopefully by exposing this menu to you, we may not have a chance to look at all of these tools, but I encourage you, after the webinar, after viewing the webinar, go ahead and play with Global Mapper. Go ahead and open up these options and see what they do, and see if they will be applicable in the type of work that you do. The other one I want to show you right here is to create squares of a fixed ground area. This was a tool that was added based on a particular requirement for a particular customer. He asked for this tool, and Mike Childs added it fairly recently to the setup. So again, how this works is you establish the specific dimensions of the feature you want to create. I'm just looking at my scale down below. I want to make sure that's actually something we can see on our screen. 1,000 square kilometers should work okay. And you can see my cursor now has this temporary little box attached. I simply click on the screen and it creates a feature. And I can do it again and again and again. So I've got this standard template square feature that I can recreate again and again based on a specific area that I plugged in. What else have we got in here? We've been talking about squares and rectangles, very uniform features to this point. Let's take a look at some other tools in here. Once again, activating my digitizer. I'll zoom in a little closer, again, to keep things at the proper scale, even though we don't have anything in the background. Once again, right-click. This time I'm going to show you how we can create an arc area. Basically, it's an area feature that's defined by a portion of a circle, if you like. And the dialog box that you use to set this up allows me to establish a couple of parameters here. First of all, my start angle. Now, if you consider 0 to be north, if I wanted to create an arc area that was, let's say, from a northeasterly point, I'll type in the angle of 45 here. From that 45-degree angle, I can then determine the extent of the arc. Right now it's at 360, which in this case would create an entire circle for me, but we can obviously modify this. Anything less than 360, I'm going to put in, let's say 100. That will be 100 degrees from a starting point of 45 degrees. I can manually draw the extent of this arc, or I can define the extent of the arc based on a fixed radius. In other words, the point of origin at which that arc begins can be defined by the distance I establish in here. In my case, I'm going to do it manually, and we'll click OK. So once again, I have a cursor which says area. It's waiting for me to click on the map, and if I click and hold, you can see I can now create very interesting, and it's because of my projection, unfortunately you're seeing that, a very interesting arc feature on the screen, manually defined in this case by dragging my cursor out. And again, we'll wipe the slate clean. Let's see what else we've got here. We have, and this is again a question we get quite frequently, we have exposed the buttons in the toolbar for creating areas and lines and trace mode lines. We get a lot of questions as to how to create a circle. What if I just want to draw a circle? Well, as I'll show in a minute, we do have a range ring tool that can be used for that function, but a more basic tool for creating a circle, or an ellipse for that matter, again is available in our right-click menu options. By right-click, again, circular elliptical area is an option right here. I'm going to go ahead and select it. And once again, I simply drag to select it. In this case, when I drag, it simply creates a circular feature based on the radius that I've defined. If I hold my shift button, I'm hoping this will work this time, yes, this is where it now allows me to create a free-form ellipse as opposed to a circle. And again, I'm holding my shift button down for this purpose. So if the circle is actually an oblong or an elongated circle or an ellipse, as the case may be, I can create that very easily by holding the shift button down. Let's talk about points very quickly. And again, let's erase everything. We created points initially by specifically clicking on the map. Very simple tool. Just click on the map and that point will be created. If you need to create a point at a very specific location, again, we have a right-click option for that purpose. By the way, the right-click, I should remind you, I know I mentioned at the start, but in order to access that right-click, those digitizer right-click options, you'll need to have the digitizer selected. If I have my zoom tool selected, it will not work. In fact, my map has actually gone back to its initial view because it's not recognized any data, and it doesn't think that I'm actually going to create any data. So that digitizer needs to be selected for you to have access to the digitizing tools by right-clicking. Under my point features list, I can create a point in a position. Now, basically, either what this does, it allows me to type in an X and Y value, or based on the geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude, or military grid reference if you're using that. And I can put a point elevation in here at this stage as well. So any pre-existing information that I have about this very specific point, I can just type these values in and click OK, obviously to the level of accuracy that I need. And now in the real world, it's much more likely if you're mapping points that you have a list of points. Perhaps their specific location have been fed to you through somebody collecting data on a GPS receiver. In that case, I wouldn't typically recommend you use this approach for placing these points. If those points exist in a text file, an ASCII file, much simpler to import them in a file format, and Global Mapper will then plot them each concurrently rather than having to type them manually. But this is for a very specific point, for one point. Again, gives us the option to define the visual parameters and places that point right on the screen. One other tool, one specialty tool I want to show you, which is another type of point, is our strike and dip point. Any geologists out there will be familiar with what strike and dip is. Basically, it's a way to determine the alignment of a bedding plane and the angle of the bedding plane as it enters into the earth, I guess. So strike being the bearing relative to north or relative to whatever point of reference you establish, and then your dip being an angle from the horizontal. So the strike and dip point creator is a little bit different, a little bit more involved, and you can see the cursor now after I select that tool. Again, it's prompting me to select a particular location. Click on the map. By the way, if the point that I click is not precisely where I want to place this point, I do have the option to move this later. I can very precisely place this later, establishing more precise coordinates. But basically what we do here is we establish that strike bearing, and you'll notice the actual icon or the symbol that's going to be used to represent this is angled in that way based on the azimuth I put in there. And then my dip value essentially becomes my label. So I'll type in 30, and we have various options in terms of the symbology. Geologists will be familiar with a lot of these symbol structures. They can recreate these very easily in Global Mapper. Give this feature a description, assign it to a layer if necessary, and we'll click OK, and you'll see those parameters are now represented in that point icon. It is a point feature, but it's a very specialized point feature that we created. Now, to this point, the creation of the features on the map has been very much manually determined. I'm scribbling, drawing. Perhaps in the real world I would be tracing an image, but it's all manual input. Okay, maybe the pointed position was a different approach where we actually knew the coordinates. But if you do have more precise values for creating features, for delineating a feature, drawing a feature, we have a very powerful COGO function within Global Mapper. We have a button right here on the toolbar. It's also available as a right-click option. That allows us initially to trigger the COGO, coordinate geometry input. We click on the map. In this case, it doesn't matter where I click, and I'll explain why in just a second. But if I'm following a set of dimensions from perhaps a property description or from information that somebody has given me about the dimensions of an easement perhaps, I simply click on the map at that location. Now obviously the default starting point is where I clicked, but if that value actually is something that's more precisely defined, I can set the starting position right here. And again, maybe copy and paste those point of origin coordinates that will determine where that initial point will be. From that point, then we can now begin to create the feature based on a couple of different processes, basically that perform the same function. The most simple of these is to establish a distance and a bearing. In my case, I'm looking at the scale that I'm using down below. I'm obviously not referencing anything underneath. So in this case, I'm going to exaggerate these distances more than I would probably do in the real world, but we obviously want to see something on the screen. So 3,000 kilometers is my first line segment, and we'll choose a bearing of, let's say, 180 degrees. Now, if everything goes according to plan, this should give us a line that goes due south. As you can see, that is now represented. And the dialog box stays open. I simply added a point. We can continue with that process. Let's go for 2,000 kilometers on a bearing of 270 degrees, which in this case will send it hopefully over to the left side of my screen. And again, you'll see that. And again, because of the projection, the geographic projection, it's appearing offset slightly because I didn't zoom in very far. But you can see how this process works. You can essentially build the different points that delineate a feature by manually putting the specific dimensions in. And you can see the corresponding coordinate values are now being added to this list at the bottom of the screen. A couple of other ways of doing this. COGO is the convention of COGO is to establish an initial value of being north or south, and then degrees, minutes, and or seconds, or degrees, minutes, or seconds, whichever level of precision you need, or whatever format of coordinate input you want to establish. It doesn't have to be degrees, minutes, seconds, west or east of that point of reference. So it will be north, 23 degrees, 14 minutes, 12 seconds west of north, and then the final value is your distance. And in this case, you can determine the distance by pulling this drop down to determine what those units of measure are. So that's a tool for essentially establishing linear line features, I guess, that connect points that you put in here. So slightly different approach. And the final one allows us has been developed for one-handed entry. Basically, you define a quadrant. 1, 2, 3, or 4, a bearing and a distance. Now, the way this has been set up, you can essentially do this with one hand on a numeric keypad, allowing you to enter these values as well. Ultimately, with the same end result. Ultimately, what we do in this case is create a linear feature. When you're finished, you click Done. Again, we're seeing the same dialog box as before. What do we want to do with this feature? We're creating a line feature in this case. Question often comes up, what if I want to create an area from that, or what if I want to simply define points? As I'm going to show you in a few minutes, you can easily convert this line to an area or to a series of points as necessary. So those tools are definitely available. So those are some of the basic and what we would probably define as more advanced drawing tools. I didn't talk about all of them, but hopefully you saw through the right-click menu there are a number of additional tools that are available to you that you can use for creating those features, for delineating or drawing those features. I mentioned earlier, we're essentially starting from a clean slate. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. I'm going to bring up a specific layer in this case. I'm going to bring up a reference layer for illustrating some of the new tools and other tools I'm going to show you. Now, these are, again, these are vector tools. These are tools for drawing. They're tools for creating vector features, but they're more automated. The tools I'm about to show you are essentially, they create vector features based on certain parameters that you establish. Some of these you will see in buttons in the toolbar. Some of them we will have to right-click to get to these tools. First one I'm going to show you is a grid tool. This is an extremely useful tool for creating essentially an arbitrary grid that overlays any data that you have loaded. Now, this can be used if you're working on a sampling process, or I know this has been used in search and rescue operations if you need to delineate a particular search area and assign certain areas to certain search parties. I know this type of tool has been used in that regard. This does not create a uniform latitude and longitude grid. We do have a tool that will allow you to simply superimpose lat long, or whatever the coordinate system that you're using happens to be. That's different. This is an arbitrary grid that's based on what you establish. Now, I'm going to simply click at a point on my screen after having selected that tool, and you'll notice the dialog box allows me to specify the parameters of this grid. Number of rows, for instance, number of columns, width and height of each cell. Now, I'm going to start with these values because looking at my scale, I want to establish a pretty wide grid in this case. Let's go for a 25 by 25 kilometer grid. We can drop these values down and make the size that we need. And then how many rows, how many columns. I'm going to make 10 by 10. And these are just obviously values I've taken off the top of my head. A couple of things to note here. If we wanted to establish a grid within a particular area, we can crop the grid to a selected area. So it's not available to me right now. This is grayed out, but if I wanted to just limit the visualization of the grid to what's inside an area feature, I do have that choice. The bottom part of this dialog box allows me to establish the labeling parameters for this grid. I'm not too concerned about that at this stage. I'm simply going to click OK. And what you're seeing here is a selected series of vectors, series of area features. That's why you're seeing this hatch pattern. I'm just going to deselect them. And now you'll see my grid superimposed on top of my underlying data. So again, if I was doing some sort of sampling process or trying to assign a certain area to a certain search party, if you like, very useful tool for that purpose. These are area features. These are individual area features. I can select them individually, perhaps do an analysis, show me how many points are within each area, perhaps show me how many customers I have within each grid cell. So these are the types of analyses that you can do with this type of this tool. Very useful. Some of the other options are I could have rotated the grid, establishing it based on the alignment of my data, perhaps. So a lot of different options for establishing that grid. I'm going to go ahead and close that overlay. I'm going to show you another tool that we have for, again, kind of an automated tool for creating vector features. A favorite of mine, I use this in a lot of situations, and this is my range rings tool. In my case, I'm going to choose a point on my map after selecting the button in the toolbar. I'm just going to click at a point on the map to establish this. In a more realistic situation, you're probably going to base your range rings on a known point. Perhaps it's a feature you've already created. Perhaps it's a known location. But in my case, I'm just going to simply click on the map. My range ring creation tool allows me to establish the number of rings and the radius of each ring. And again, I'm going to establish, let's say, 3 radiating rings radiating from this point, and the dimensions, I'm going to make these 10 kilometers. And we will simply click OK. We don't need to create a point in our case. and click OK. And by the way, this is kind of a misrepresentation, but you can actually create rectangles. I know we call it the range rings tool, but you can create rectangles, 10 by 10 in this case, rather than circles if you check the box that I have my cursor is located on right now. Obviously, in our case, we want to create rings. We'll simply click OK, and our rings are now represented. Now, I could use this again to analyze an area of impact, 10 kilometers, 20, and 30 kilometers, location of business perhaps, or what's within the vicinity of a particular location. Schools, things like that, things hospitals, how close are the hospitals to a defined location. Very, very useful tool, very simple tool. With this now selected, an application might be to right-click and to find all the features that intersect. We have selection tools that will let you do that. Advanced selection, select all the points within the selected area. Select all the lines within the selected area. So you can perform a lot of analysis type functions with these range rings selected. And we will close that. So there's just a couple of tools. Another tool, I'm quickly going to wipe the slate clean and load up another layer here just for visual reference. One that we've used before in our webinars and one that you may have used as well is our buffering tool. Buffering is a tool that creates an area feature. It's a vector feature, but the vector feature originates around an existing feature. In my case, I've simply selected a road segment here, and I'm going to go create a buffer around that road segment. There is a button in the toolbar for doing that. There's also a right-click option. Same end result. Buffering is similar to range rings, but buffering can be applied to linear features. It can be applied to an area feature. It doesn't have to be around a point. In my case, I'm going to create a buffer of a fixed distance. Let me bring this back down to meters, and let's establish a 10-meter buffer. Now, this is a useful tool in this context because I have road center lines mapped here. These are linear features. These do not have any width. In the real world, roads obviously do have a width, and if you want to map more precisely the extent of a road, it's a good idea to take your center lines and create a buffer. And I'm just doing it for one small section here. And we'll click OK. And difficult to see, but you can see now I have an area feature that was created from that linear feature. So that's our buffer tool, again, very useful. Can be used for buffering lines, areas, or points. A select group of points can be buffered to show the kind of the overall coverage area for a collected group of points. You can merge different buffer areas together to create one large area feature. We have a very interesting tool. I'm actually going to keep this feature selected for the time being. I'm going to kind of go in reverse right now. This is a fairly new tool that we've added, another tool for vectorizing. But in this case, what we're doing is we're starting with an area feature, and that area is selected, as you can see. I want to create this center line from this area. And we've developed a tool called a skeleton line tool that will do just that. If I right-click and go to my advanced feature creation options, I can create an area skeleton or a center line from a selected area feature. And again, we're creating a line feature here, kind of opposite what we did before. And now we have our line back again. So you can create a buffer from a line, or you can create a center line from an area. Two tools that go in opposite direction. Again, we'll wipe the slate clean. Let me load up another layer. This is a points layer. Now, a couple of tools I can show you with this points layer. This happens to be distribution of cemeteries in the state of Maine where our company is located, just as a sample layer. We have a couple of tools that allow you to delineate the coverage of an area. And again, these are tools for creating vector features. We are talking about kind of the full range of vectorization or vector tools we have in Global Mapper, digitizing tools. The tools I'm about to show you allow you to delineate the extent of an area. A couple of ways of doing that. Within the Overlay Control Center, I can right-click and I have an option to establish what's called a bounding box. B boxes, an area feature that establish the bounds of a layer. In this case, you can see it's a rectangular feature. The MBR is how it's referred to very often. The bounding rectangle that encompasses the minimum area that contains the features in a particular layer. So in terms of coverage, yes, it shows us the extent of the area, but not really the actual distribution of the points. For that, we have another tool. Let me go ahead and close my box. Slightly different approach for creating this tool. We're going to use my Digitizer. I'm going to right-click going to advanced feature creation options, and I have a tool here for creating coverage area. This basically takes the existing points in this case and creates an outline, if you like. You can see there's a couple of outlying points here that are kind of skewing my coverage area, but this outlines in a more a tighter way the extent of the points in this layer. This might be useful for LiDAR or something of like that type, where you want to delineate the extent of your LiDAR coverage in a more accurate way than simply drawing a box. So again, it's a digitizing tool, it's a tool for creating vector features, but that creates them in a fairly automated way. Another tool for creating vectors that I'm not going to show you, I know we've featured this a lot in our past webinars, is our contouring tool. If you have an elevation model loaded, very simple process for creating contours, and in creating contours you again are creating vector features. So these are some of the automated tools you can employ for creating vector features, either through determining grid extent, range ring extent, buffering, or elevation in the case of contours. I'm going to take a slight break from creating features. I'm going to, again, unload my data. I want to talk about the configuration of the digitizer. So we've created features manually. We have created some features using some of the automated tools. Let's talk very quickly about some of the configuration options. For those of you not familiar with Global Mapper, we have a button in the toolbar that opens up the configuration dialog box. And there's a couple of very specific tools I want to show you in the configuration dialog box. Under our vector display a tab, there are tools for filtering the display of features that you digitize. So for instance, if you do not want to see all of the types of area features, if you want to limit the display just to features of a particular type, you have filtering options you can employ to create those filters. You can also limit what's selected, and you can basically turn off all areas or all lines as needed. So you have a number of configuration options that allow you to limit what's displayed on the screen or limit what's selected on the screen. At the bottom of this vector display window, there are a number of checkboxes, and there's a couple of recommendations I want to suggest as far as how you interact with the digitizer, how you interact with vector features on the map. If we scroll down just a little bit, one of the options here, about halfway down the list, is to only highlight the border of selected area features. You may have noticed that after I created an area and selected it, it was the fact that it was selected was denoted by a hatch pattern. I find it much more useful just to simply use the border. It's a little easier to see. This is a bright yellow border. My configuration is set up in this way, and it's something I would suggest you maybe take a look at as well. Some of the other options in here, you can enable or disable snapping. We haven't actually looked at snapping yet. Snapping is a process whereby one object would automatically try to attach itself to an adjacent object when you're creating it, and you can opt to enable snapping, and you can also force snapping just to point features or just to vertices, line and area vertices, and you can see there's keyboard toggle shortcuts that are available for that as well. So a couple of snapping options, again, under the vector display area that we would suggest you might want to take a look at. So we have a number of configuration options. Again, I'll just click OK for the time being, but again, look at those options and see what works for you in your situation. There are also a number of options that are available in our right-click menu. When I've been right-clicking, you've noticed we used right-click to create objects, but we can also establish options as well. Again, some of these are repeated. We can enable or disable snapping. We can render deleted vert features. Now, this is an extremely useful tool. Let me bring up my towns again. This is an existing shapefile. Oh, let me actually unload all of that and bring it in so it's projected correctly. Try that one more time. There we go. We can very easily, obviously, delete features. If I use my digitizer tool and I select a feature, you'll notice immediately it's now highlighted with yellow as opposed to that hatch pattern that we saw previously. But I can very easily delete this feature. I'm using the delete key on my keyboard, and it's gone. There's no longer a feature here. People often panic. Oh, what did I do? Well, very easy to undelete. In our right-click options menu, we have an option to render our deleted features. Let me let you into a secret. It's physically impossible for you to delete features in Global Mapper. What appears to be deleted is actually put in a different state. It's made invisible. It's put in a different, assigned different visual characteristics. Normally those characteristics determine that it's not going to be displayed on the screen, which is what you would expect. But on occasions like this where you inadvertently deleted something, you can turn on deleted features and you will see everything that you had previously deleted. So I can select it once again and right-click, and lo and behold, I have an undelete function now. I can bring it back to life again. So deleting and undeleting is an option that's available. In order to undelete, again, under options, you need to make sure you're actually rendering those deleted features. Otherwise, obviously, you will not see them. So we would suggest you enable that function. Okay, let's talk about some of the editing functions that can be applied. And I'm looking at my watch here, and we are quickly running out of time, but we'll go through some of these very quickly. We've talked about deleting. Moving objects as well. I'm going to select a poor unsuspecting island right off the coast of Maine here. We can move objects or edit objects by first selecting them with the Digitizer and then right-clicking and then choosing from a number of options. If I go down to the Move menu, you can see the first option is just simply to move it. I can drag it with my cursor. I can shift it at a particular distance. Rotating it is another option. I can either rotate by a defined bearing or manually rotate. So I have a number of options for modifying the selected feature. Moving is perhaps the most common. And if I wanted to move a feature that I've created, I find the easiest way is to hold my Alt button down on my keyboard and select it. By holding that Alt button down, you'll notice my cursor immediately says Move. And that's essentially the shortcut for putting it in immediate into move mode. And I can move that island out of the way. Okay, what if I move a feature and I want to take it, bring it back to where it was previously? We have a very useful tool, right-click. Again, we're in the Move Reshape feature menu. This time, because I've selected something that was previously modified, I now have a Restore option. So this is essentially the undo function again. Restore the original shape. Are you sure? And I'll say yes, and everything's back to the way it was. So moving, editing, deleting, you can modify, but also you can bring these things back to the way they were before. Very, very simple process of restoring those features. We have tools for smoothing as well. This is perhaps most useful if you've got if you've created linear features, perhaps from one of the automated tools that don't appear to be, perhaps they appear to be zigzag or a jagged appearance. And I think the easiest way to illustrate that is to actually draw something of that type. Now, this smoothing option, what it does essentially is it will artificially put in additional vertices to smooth a line. If I right-click and I go to my Move menu once again, you will notice I have the option here to smooth the selected line feature. This is perhaps an exaggerated example right here, but you can see it's actually flattened that line. It's smoothed out those angular features. We've used this a lot for smoothing contours, for instance. If you generate contour lines with a low-resolution elevation data set, contours tended to be very angular. This will allow you to smooth the contours to make them appear a little bit better. So smoothing is an option. There also, by the way, in this same context, is an option to simplify. Where smoothing adds additional vertices to create a smooth line, simplify allows you to remove vertices, and you do that based on a spacing. So if you wanted to essentially dumb down a line feature, you can use that simplify option. Okay, let's talk very quickly about another couple of editing tools we have. I'll just leave that line feature on the map, and I'll zoom out slightly. And I'm going to use my Digitizer tool, and I'm going to create an arbitrary area right on my screen. And you can see that before I click OK, you can see that covers a large part of the central part of the state here. We'll simply click OK, and I'm going to go and select it. We can crop features in Global Mapper. Very, very simple tool for cropping, for essentially taking what's inside of a defined area and capturing that, or for that matter, taking what's outside of a defined area and preserving that. Both of those processes are available under our Crop Combine Split Functions menu. We can crop loaded features to a selected area, which is what I'm going to do. We can cut selected areas from another area. I'm going to do that in just a second. Or we have a resample function as well. I'm going to choose the first option here to crop the loaded features to a selected area. And it brings up a dialog box that lets me choose how this behavior is going to be performed. Do we want to put the cropped features in the same layer or create a new layer? Well, in my case, I want to create a new layer. Do we want the cropped features to be deleted? Well, no, not in this case. I don't. Do we want to keep the data outside? As I mentioned before, we can keep those areas which are not inside our cropped area. Again, we don't want to do that. We'll simply click OK. We'll create a new layer, and we'll call it Test, and we'll click OK. And we will see if we turn off our other layers, we now are left with a small subsection of our previous layer. Now, when we consider some of the tools that we've used up to this point, for instance, our range rings tool, or perhaps even our gridding tool, you can see how easy it is now to essentially set up a process where there's a relationship between an area defined in a range ring and the features that are contained within that range ring. You can crop everything that's outside, in other words, remove everything that's outside, isolating what's in the middle. So a very, very useful tool. Let me just unload everything I have. And I'm going to bring in a variation on the layer that we just took a look at. This is the same towns layer, but in this case, as I demonstrated a few minutes ago, I've actually removed one of the towns to simulate how we can use the digitizer to essentially fill in the middle part here. Now, if we turn on the vertices for these features, you will notice, and by the way, this is an option under right-click where we can render vertices. Show line and area vertices, and you can see if I was to recreate or draw this feature, there would be a lot of snapping involved. It would take a long time for me to do that. I'm going to show you a way using the digitizer that we can actually fill in this area with a new town. In other words, I can draw the feature filling in this hole in a very, very simple way. Let me again uncheck my vertices so I can show you this process. Again, my intent here is to draw the feature that's missing from the middle of these town boundaries. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw an area that's a little bit larger, essentially encompassing the area in question, but not obviously, not inside. In other words, I've drawn a feature that overlaps the area. I'm just going to right-click, and so we can see what we're working with here. I'm actually going to define specific visual characteristics. I'm going to make this a red color, and we'll make it semi-transparent. About 50% should be fine. And we'll click OK. And once again, click OK. Now, what you can see here, because the underlying layer and the feature that I've just created are both 50% opaque, you can see where the combination of the two creates this darkened area. And you can see the challenge I have here. My challenge is to essentially cut this down. Well, once again, this is a very, very simple process, because what I can do using my digitizer is to essentially go around and hold the control button on my keyboard and select all of these joining areas. And if this was just one large feature, obviously I would just need to select one feature. But in my case, I've got numerous bounding areas that I want to use to create the border of the central area. Now, the tool that I'm going to use this was not designed for this purpose, but it works very well in this context. Because what I'm going to do is I want to right-click. I'm going to go to my Crop Combine Split Functions menu, and I'm going to cut selected areas from another area. Now, this is usually used for adding an island. I'm going to do that in just 1 second here, and we'll probably have to wrap up after that. But in this context, I'm going to use it essentially to edge match a feature to existing areas. Select this tool. What it's asking me to do is choose the parent. In other words, what are we going to cut from? Well, what we're cutting from is this arbitrary shape that I drew in the middle. So I'm just going to select right in the middle here. That is essentially my parent. It's going to ask me if I want to delete the other features. I want to say no. And as a result, I end up with a nice little area feature defined by the extent of the boundaries of the features I selected. So instead of having to recreate the feature by tracing the vertices, I was able to use that tool which is normally used for creating islands, but in this case I used it for edge matching. So that's a very, very useful tool for essentially filling in, if you like, or aligning features to another existing feature. The tool I used, by the way, that islands tool, is normally used for, as the name implies, for creating islands. So if I drew a hole, for instance, or drew an area, I'm just going to right-click and say OK. In this case, I'm going to select that island. Using the same tool as before, we're going to go to our Crop Combine Split Functions. We're going to create an island. My parent in this case is the outer part. I am going to delete in this case, and you see now I have a hole in the feature. I've basically got a polygon that has a hole in the middle. So that's normally how that would be used. But in my context, I was able to use it for a more creative purpose. Very quickly, I want to talk to you about how you can edit individual vertices within a feature. Let's go ahead and we'll zoom in. This is actually Mohegan Island off the coast of Maine. We exposed the vertices a few minutes ago when we right-click and chose options, and we opted to show our area line vertices. You can also simply show vertices for features that are selected, which I think is probably more useful. Now, initially, we're not seeing any vertices, but if I select a feature now, as well as that bounding color that I described, that I said previously, now you can see the individual vertices for that selected feature. And once you have the vertices visible, there's a number of things that you can do. You can select individual vertices, you can select multiple vertices, and you can perform editing not to the feature itself, but to the individual vertices. We have an entire submenu now for vertex editing, where we can move a vertex, we can delete a selected vertex or a collection of vertices if necessary. We can establish a precise position for a vertex, a specific vertex. An XY value can be established. So there's a number of options for essentially modifying features right down to the individual shape points that we use to create them. And again, deleting and moving them as necessary. Let's go ahead and select move in this case. And you'll notice my cursor once again says move, but in this case, because only the vertex is selected, it's going to allow me to drag that to a new location. So this is essentially how you would reshape features. A feature that you had drawn which perhaps didn't match exactly what you were trying to trace, it's very easy for you to expose these vertices and use that vertex editing tool and move it around or reshape it as needed. Okay, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to show you a couple more things and then we'll wrap up. I talked about converting. One of the final bullets in my PowerPoint talked about how to convert objects. This is a very, very important component of the Digitizer tool because often you'll find yourself with a linear feature and you actually need an area. You need something that actually has a fill, if you like. In this case, I'm going to create a line that not quite connects. But this is a line feature, but perhaps this is supposed to be something that joins. Maybe you used the Kogo tool to follow the dimensions of a property, but as you can see here, it didn't quite line up. We need this to be a filled area feature. Very simple process for creating areas from lines or areas from points, or vice versa, or points from lines or lines from points, a number of different options. Very simply right-click, Advanced Feature Creation Options will give you all of those options. Now, because I've selected a line, I have options that are specific to that line. A couple that I don't have time to show you but are worth looking at if you have time yourself are to create point features spaced along this feature. In other words, if you need to create sample points at a defined distance along, let's say you're doing an analysis of a pipeline or perhaps a river channel, you can establish those points based on a specified distance or based on a specified number of points within the defined line. So if I need 20 sample points along a pipeline, this will do that for you. Again, apologies, I don't have time to actually demonstrate that, but it's a very, very useful function. We can create new points from this line simply by turning the vertices, which we use to create the line, into individual point features. That's another option in here. What I'm going to do in my case is actually create a new area. Now, in this case, you can see it's not quite aligned. So we'll have to do a little cheating here. Global Mapper will actually do that for me. With this unchecked, require connected results to be fully closed before creating area. Well, in my case, no, I don't want that to be the case. So I'm just simply going to click OK. And it will do that for me. It makes that final closure. I now have an area where previously there was a line. Now that my area is selected, once again, right-click, Advanced Feature Creation Options. We can now create points from our area. We can create lines. We can create centroid points. Extremely useful tool. Puts a point at the geometric center of every selected area. Again, allows you to attribute data that was originally associated with an area to the point that represents the geometric center of that area. You can use that for doing things like density mapping, generating a heat map based on the data in those points. These points will inherit all of the attributes from the area that was used to create them. So just a couple of examples of converting data, converting points to lines, converting lines to areas. All of those functions are available. Don't get too distraught if the feature you're trying to delineate is in the wrong format. Global Mapper will allow you to convert that very, very simply. Now, the final bullet in my bullet list said tips and tricks. Well, hopefully over the course of the last hour, we've given you quite a few tips and tricks already. A couple more I want to show you, I want to recommend. First of all, it's the use of the custom keyboard shortcut menu. As you've seen today, I've gone to that right-click menu quite a lot to find specific tools. If in your workflow you do that repeatedly, I would suggest you consider setting up the shortcut keys, because you can establish any of these digitizer functions that we use today as your own keyboard shortcut. You can see they're all listed here. Now, obviously, you're not going to use all of them, but if there's a handful that you use repeatedly, choose them, select a convenient keyboard shortcut, perhaps note it down on a Post-it note beside your computer, and then you no longer have to go back to the menus. We'll just go ahead and click F2 for my rotated rectangle. F2 is going to be my keyboard shortcut. And all I have to do is use the F2 in my keyboard, and I've got my tool already there and waiting for me. So that's my first recommendation. When you're creating numerous features, especially, this comes out especially with points, the modify feature info is an essential part of the software, allowing you to confirm the characteristics of what is being created. But often you don't need that. And if that's the case, you'll see now that that is no longer appearing, and the trick here is I'm actually holding the Enter button on my keyboard. It allows me to create features, basically confirming the parameters in real time. And again, that's just simply holding down the Enter button on my keyboard allows me to do that. So that's another little tip that enables you to use the digitizer very effectively. I'm going to mention this again. I've mentioned it in past webinars. I just want to remind you, when you're creating features, don't do what I did today, which is basically ignore the feature type. When you're creating points, those points obviously are intended to mean something. Go into the feature type for that point and either create a new type if one doesn't exist already, or choose an existing type and make it something that's meaningful. I have to stress, don't do what I do what I say in this case, because it really does make your life a lot easier rather than dealing with constantly unknown points, these black dots on your screen. So that's just a recommendation for the effective use of the digitizer. And the final recommendation is probably the most hidden component in the entire software, and that is a very nice little tool that we have called our Quick Point Creator. I guarantee a lot of the experienced Global Mapper users have never actually considered this, but my Quick Point Creator, obviously specific to points, allows me to establish my own library of frequently used point types. So let's choose my hospital as an example. You'll notice that's been added here. This window always stays open. So I can jump back and forward between different types and automatically select them as I'm adding points. So you can build up your own library of point types, kind of park that over on the side of your screen, and switch between the different types of points that you create on the map. So that's our Quick Point Creator. There has been some rumors that we'll be doing some work with this tool to make it a little bit more robust. Maybe I'm putting Mike Childs on the spot a little bit by saying that, but it is a very, very nice tool, even based on what it's able to do today. Just simply, again, establishing your own library, establishing your own set of points that you repeatedly create. You don't have to go through and select those on the list every time. And we've overshot our time by just a little bit. Let me go back to my agenda and just recap what we covered today. And again, I mentioned at the start that I was wondering, how are we going to fill up an hour with the digitizer? Believe me, my notes have a lot of things that I didn't get to, and I apologize for that. But obviously, the digitizer is an extremely powerful component of Global Mapper. A lot of functionalities available for creating and editing features. I do encourage you to play with it. Go out there and draw some features and see what editing capabilities are available. You'll be very surprised as to the capability that you have at your fingertips with the digitizer tool. Basic drawing, advanced drawing, and then editing and configuring features. We talked a little bit about converting as well, and then my digitizer tips and tricks at the end. So hopefully you got a little bit of useful information from this webinar. As always, we are always available to you. Our website, as you see noted here, the Global Mapper Forum, very active forum. If you haven't visited, I do encourage you to visit and register. Browse the question and answer postings, or post your own question if necessary. If you're having problems, or if you have a particular request for a function that you'd like to see in the software, great way to do that. Also, a couple of email addresses in here for support. ordering if you're interested in ordering or upgrading. Perhaps you want a network license where you currently have single-user licenses. Email the folks in our sales team, and they'll be happy to help you with that. And then if you're interested in training, we mentioned some of the training opportunities at the top of the session, but we can also organize training on demand, basically, for you and your company if that works for you. So please give us a shout if you're interested in training. We can essentially take some of the same concepts we cover in our webinars and elaborate them, make them relevant for you. So once again, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to teaming up again next week and next month and talking more about Global Mapper. Thank you.